even with the first disciples, he said, follow me, abandon your whole life.
Yeah.
That you're comfortable with, this is your life of a fisherman. Abandon that and come and follow me. Well, welcome back to our FBC Ropes Family Podcast. We forgot to say the title on the last podcast that you may or may not have heard, depending on if we had posted it or not. But today we're going to be talking about discipleship. Like, what is discipleship? What is a disciple? So Courtney, I'm going to start with you. I'm going to ask you, what is discipleship?
To me, discipleship is leading by example and devoting your whole life to Jesus and showing him in all aspects of your life. And I think that's important in our families because we are disciples to our kids who then go out into the world.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. A disciple is somebody who makes Jesus the center of their life. And I think discipleship is modeling that for somebody. And if you're looking for how to disciple somebody or what a disciple is, you can look at Jesus' example. He went and found some dudes and said, "Hey, come follow me," and he just endured life with them.
I think sometimes with discipleship, it's people will look at it as, I'm not perfect and I can't disciple because people are going to look at me and go, well, she did whatever. Well, Jesus was perfect, but no one else is. So just do the best you can and try to be like Jesus every day. And
yeah, I think you can do life like that regardless. It's not about just disciples. We're not going to be perfect in just regular life. Right. Jesus, like you said, perfect. Jesus is the standard. Mm-hmm. I think that he sets the bar. And we are looking to hit that standard, but he knows we're going to fall short. And that's ultimately why God sent Jesus to be able to redeem us, to be able to be disciples and disciple makers. I have an interesting point. I was listening to a podcast the other day. I may have told you this. I'm not sure. But they were talking about if somebody is spending every day, every time the church doors are open, if somebody is spending every time the church doors are open at church, if they're coming on Sundays or if they're coming on Wednesdays, and then they may meet at a different time, or if you're in church all of the time that you can be, that still only amounts to 4% of your year, or under 4% technically. If you're looking at our church, which is basically has a lot of people in the door 3 to 4 hours a week, and so there's a lot of other hours in your week that are left open, and we're trying to fill that with something. And so there's the other point is, and I've made this point downstairs in youth. I don't know if I've told you this either. And feel free to interject wherever you want, is we're all discipled by something. We're all being disciples of something. Mm-hmm. That could be, we're being discipled by football. That could be, we're being discipled by basketball, whatever sports we're in, or whatever sports our kids are in, we are spending time and effort in putting it into those things. And that begins to shape and form our life, and that's the hard part with discipleship is, we're kind of born to be disciples, born to be led somewhere. And we've got to be careful on where we are being discipled.
It's very true. And what we fill our time with is what we're going to think about most. And if we're only spending 4%, thinking or just being at church, we should be spending way more than that thinking about Jesus. But, being in these doors, then that's a lot of time to fill our lives with other things.
Yeah, and I think that's another reason why this podcast was born. You and I, we only get the kids for, like we said, if we get them for 3 to 4 hours a week.
Yeah.
And there's only so much discipleship and so much that we can do with the multitude of kids. I mean, the children's ministry has 30, 40 kids running around sometimes, in the youth ministry, we're being pulled in and we're being pulled in a bunch of different directions, and so we can only be so effective, and so the reason like this podcast exists is to maybe encourage families to do the rest of the 96%. What are you filling your 96% up with? And so that's really what I've been kind of thinking about for a long time is, how can our church, how can we better equip those discipleship conversations?
Well, and we're parents too.
Yeah.
So we're part of the people in this church that have our kids more than, more than the other teachers or whatever. And I mean, what am I filling my time with?
Yeah. And it's tough. And don't hear us as like, we're perfect and we are, we're up here in the church office and we're in our offices and we're reading the word, we're digging in 8 hours a day, I'd like to say that sometimes, but I can't, I'm not there, and just looking for practical ways. What are the practical ways that you and Ben, disciple your family?
We will pray with the kids, ask them, what's going on in their lives? What are things we need to pray with you about? What is something, you're struggling with, or what's going on in your lives? And especially with our oldest, he's going into junior high next year, or real junior high. And, he's had, stuff come up at school that's not what our family does or what our family believes in. And he'll say, I need to talk about this. And so we'll go to the Bible and we'll see what it has to say, or, just what he feels like is the right thing to do. And so that's been really good with him. Obviously with Allie, we pray for lots of random things. She's 6. So we might pray for a dog. You never know what you're going to pray for, but it's also showing our kids that we aren't perfect and that, yes, I got really mad at you. I yelled at you. I told you to go away, but now, we can come back, we can redeem ourselves. And I think that's important as well.
Yeah. I think, when you're being discipled by somebody, it's great to see that they're like you as well. I think it's really funny. Elliot loves to ask the most random questions right before bed. And they're always like,
does he go, hey, guess what? Guess what?
Yeah. He goes, daddy, guess what? And then he asks me a question. It's not like a guess what, I have a fact for you. It's guess what, I have a question. And it's usually like, Daddy, how did God make the trees? Or, and it's inevitably right before bed, I'm getting frustrated. Like, hey son, we just read the Bible. We just read a Bible story. We just prayed. Let's go to bed. Okay, Daddy, what do you mean when God made the trees? Or just random questions like that. But sometimes Elliot will come up with some like good questions that like really rock you. Like, what do you mean that God lives in your heart? How does he get in there? And, like that provided a great way for me to have a conversation with my son about, when you give your life to Christ, the Spirit comes within you, like he lives in your heart, and your heart, and it just kind of opens up more conversations for him, and I think that a great way to start having gospel conversations is just being intentional with it. Placing those kind of conversations in front, or not be, like you said earlier, you don't have to be the most perfect parent to have these conversations. Just be real, and have the conversations. Just talk about it. What did God do for you today? Or how did you see God's hand work today? Or what did you guys talk about in church today? Things like that. What are some cool facts that you've kind of learned about discipleship while you were preparing for this?
I guess everyone who is a Christian is a disciple. And I know we've talked about it, but you said, that should be used interchangeable. Christian, disciple. You should be, showing Jesus and leading people at all times. And then this one YouTuber that I watched said, share the word, show the world, teach the word, and serve the world. And he said that's how he always remembers how to show Jesus or how to share Jesus. Like, you're sharing, but you're also showing and teaching and then serving. And I think serving and showing are the same, but it's important.
Yeah, this has kind of this came up, I think, a little bit in our staff meeting this morning about kind of what discipleship looks like. It's not just evangelism,
Right.
We have our Bibles here. It says in Matthew 28, it says, all authority in heaven and on earth have been given to me. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. And behold, I am with you always to the end of the age. Of course, there's the go and make disciples, but it's more than just go and tell people about Jesus and hopefully they give their life to Christ, because to be a good disciple or to be a good Christian or disciple and Christian, using the word interchangeably, you gotta be in a firm foundation, right? You can't, of course you can give your life to Christ, and then, if your seeds are planted among the rocks or among the thorns, then, your faith is going to be choked out, and it's going to be really rough for you. So with our kids, when they are growing up and when they are, when they give their lives to Christ, we need to make sure that they're planted in good soil, and we need to facilitate and whatever you do with soil. I'm not really a farmer. You cultivate or fertilize the soil. I don't know, whatever good things for soil.
Right.
And make sure their foundation is built in there.
And keep working on it, because farmers don't just plant crops and walk away and go, well, I hope you grow and produce. No. Keep, encouraging our kids and challenging them. And I think we listened to Build a Boat, that song. I don't even know who it's by, but my kids love it. And so we always end up talking about Noah and how much faith he had just to go build a boat where it wasn't raining. And it's challenging. And especially with our kids in this day and age, they're going to be challenged, and they need to have somewhere, like you said, firm to stand and not be like, well,
Yeah, because there's tons of ways you can go, like, especially with your kids getting a little older, and exposed to the things kids are getting exposed to, or in like youth age kids, like there's things coming in on their phones that you can't even imagine,
right?
And like they're having to process these things, and if their soil isn't, or if they're not planted firmly in a good disciple, or they don't have a good disciple model, or if they're not planted in a strong foundation, then their roots are going to spread, and their roots are going to move, and they may be, they may be pulled up, or whatever happens to bad roots, or they may wither, and so it's a really important thing to disciple your kids and make sure that they are, they're planted in the right place. So, what are some ways that we can encourage our listeners to just be intentional with discipleship with their kids? What do you think?
I think one of the things is in Luke. It's Luke 9:23, and it says that we must deny ourselves, and if we want to be a disciple of Jesus, then you have to deny yourself. And I think showing our kids the right way to live, or, saying, because in baseball, I'll just use this example. We have parents on the team that are using bad language out loud, or, saying inappropriate things or whatever. And I think as parents, we can, step back and say, I'm not going to participate in that, or I'm not going to do X, Y, Z that they're doing. And it shows our kids that's intentional. Hey, I'm not going to do this. And so it's okay to stand up for what you believe in. And I think that gives our kids somewhere to stand.
Yeah. And I think one thing that we've covered in youth quite a bit this semester is, Jesus lived differently, or countercultural is what we always talk about. The way Jesus did things and the way that it models us to do things is completely different than our culture would do things. Like touching a leper, like the healing a leper, like 2020, we wouldn't get 6 feet within somebody with COVID, right? And so Jesus, he was up in there. He lived differently. He modeled differently. Or like even with the first disciples, he said, follow me, abandon your whole life.
Yeah.
That you're comfortable with, this is your life of a fisherman. Abandon that and come and follow me, and that, that takes guts and that takes, faith. And that's what it takes to be a disciple, is to abandon all that you have, all that you're comfortable with, and to follow Jesus, to live differently than the world.
I agree. We're very me-centered.
Yeah.
I mean, everyone in this day and age.
I agree. Like it's about us. And you can see that in just the way churches worship. We all have an opinion. And we're going to talk about worship next week. That's a little preview. We all have an opinion on how things should be done, but it's not about us. So tune in next week for that one. But I think we need to have some questions that you guys can go over as a family. I didn't prepare any. Courtney, do you have a question that you think would facilitate a good gospel conversation in the car or at the dinner table or something?
We always ask the kids, like, how can you show Jesus this week? Like, just to start the week off, how are you going to go out and show Jesus this week? And we have stock shows and sports and, just everyday life. And it's interesting to hear what they have to say to that question, because sometimes my middle child will just say something off the wall and random, but the oldest and the youngest usually take it very seriously. So we'll have, I'm going to help my friend carry her lunchbox or whatever from a 6-year-old. And that's so sweet. And that's a good question to start your week out.
Yeah. The one thing that we do to center the kids, center the kids in the mornings is we pray. When we pass the big greenhouse coming into Ropes, I don't know who owns that house. If you're listening, what's up? We start praying at that house, and that gives us about a minute to pray before we get to the door. But we ask God to help us love our friends well, to let His light shine through us, and for us to be beacons of light to our friends. And that's one way that we encourage them to start their days off right. And then when we're getting out of the car, I look at Emerson and Elliot. I say, promise me you're going to have a good day. And they say, Daddy, I promise.
That's good stuff. Our mornings aren't so happy around my house. We need to implement the praying at the greenhouse and get us on the right foot before we get out of the car.
It gives us, we're coming from Wolforth, so it's about 10 minutes of that frustration. And then when we get to the greenhouse, we're going to be praying no matter what the previous 10 minutes were all about.
Yeah. Previous hour of dragging people out of bed.
Okay, so I think that's a good end of the podcast. I'm going to go ahead and we're going to say thanks, and we'll see you next week. We're going to be uploading these things on Thursdays, and hope to have you listen. And just for fun, here's some applause because we're awesome.